Lesson 3. We are talking about English literature of the beginning of the 20th century. Last time we focused on prose. So we talked about the novelists of this period, of this era. And we said that they focused on the psychological aspect of the mind. They went very deep inside the inner lives of the characters. So this kind of writing is an original but also complex writing, a narrative technique that represents basically the thoughts, the emotions, and the perceptions of the character. Another technique used is the interior monologue. The interior monologue as the stream of consciousness are these two devices that explain, that transmit all the flow of thoughts of the mind. They could be synonyms, but the interior monologue consists of the words used for expressing the stream of consciousness, while the stream of consciousness is the process itself. Anyway, today we talk about poetry and we talk about images and symbolism. So you go to page 324 of the cornerstone. Images were belonged to the important movement in poetry founded in 1912 by Ezra Pound, the famous poet. Images claimed that poetry had to try to create clear, precise images. These images had to be created for the reader, avoiding any superfluous words. So, the right image would form a clearer idea for the reader and express exactly what the poet wanted to say. They created colloquial idioms for giving the poet greater freedom. The images rejected the traditional idea of poetry, and above all the romantic poetry. They inherited from the Romantics, according to which all poetry should be an expression of feelings and personality. So no more feelings and personality, but images, union of thought and passion. So images stated poetry had to represent things and experiences in an exact way and at the same time with a union of thought and passions. The poetry of the images results to be less subjective, as they felt that the poet should depersonalize himself in his work, allowing to the work to speak for itself. Now you can get the maps I sent you. The first one is on images. There's a conceptual map, and there's also an introduction relating to modern poetry. So the modern poetry of the years preceding the First World War was characterized by a distinction between the avant-garde, so the modern side, the avant-garde groups, and the Victorian Romantic tradition. So these are called Georgians, because they shared the taste and the themes of the Romantic tradition. But the modern poetry, the poetry linked to images and symbolism, the poetry We are talking about authors like Yeats, like Ezra Pound, like Eliot, the new generation of young poets, and also the war poets who wrote uh, about war, but in a very different way. So, modern poetry officially began with images, as we have just said, a movement which flourished between 1912 and 1917. The name Imagist was invented by Ezra Pound, an American poet. The main features of this poetry, of this way of writing, are, first of all, a constant use of art, clear and precise images. They just wanted to create and transmit these images. Use of a rhythm freed from the artificial demands of metrical regularity. Senza metrica, non esisteva la metrica. Choice of any subject matter. Poems, usually short, where the poet's response to a scene or object and contained no more comment. Non c'è commento, ma solamente la voglia di rappresentare una scena o un oggetto. The aim of poetry was to achieve precision, discipline, dry hardness. So, for revising, art, clear, precise images, a precision, discipline, dry hardness, no moral comment, short poems, free verse. Images, to sum up, was born in the first years of the 20th century in England and America, and this was a poetic movement aimed at substituting strong sentimentalism in poetry, per cui non più il sentimentalismo della poesia romantica, by introducing everyday language and themes and presenting clear, concise images in order to express their message, per cui esprimevano il loro messaggio creando delle immagini. Il linguaggio era chiaro e doveva essere il più chiaro possibile. Innovative meters and rhythms were used generally in a free verse construction, per cui assenza di metrica. The founders of this movement were Ezra Pound and T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot is an author we analyze within the end of the month. Symbolism. This is the other sheet, the other photocopy, the other map I sent you. Symbolism and free words. French symbolism, a movement which had started in France with Baudelaire's, also influenced the new poetry. We have already said this. Remember, symbolism. The symbolist stresses the importance of the unconscious and the use of images to evoke rather than to state. Anche i simbolisti, ovviamente, l'importanza dell'inconscio e la creazione delle immagini per evocare stati d'animo. Ideas were presented in an oblique way, and free verse was used to exploit the sound and musicality of words. Eliot stated that poetry is not a turning loose of emotion, but an escape from emotion, per cui non si parla più di emozioni come nella poesia romantica, ma si rifuggono, si scappa dalle emozioni. An escape from personality. So, they rejected the poetic diction of the past, e soprattutto quella romantica, but also tried to avoid the language of common people. They invented their own vocabulary and mythology to voice the fragmentation of culture. Poi qui avete la mappa. The main characteristics of the symbolism and free verse are indirect statements, use of allusive language, multiple associations of words, importance given to the sound, per cui la musicalità della poesia, il suono. Use of quotations from other literature revealing cosmopolitan interests, and use of free verse. Possibility for the reader to bring meaning to the poem. Now you can go back to the Coniston, page 325. As I have just said, we are going to study Eliot, to analyze Eliot and the wasteland. So Eliot was a follower of images. He was also a very close friend of Ezra Pound. And he wrote mainly poetry, but also literary critics works. So the most famous poems, the most famous poem and the most famous work is The Wasteland. There are also the war poets like Cecil, Brooke, and Owen, and they wrote about the First World War, and their poetry marks a decisive change from an era of confidence and optimism. They moved away from the traditional representation of war, one of glory and patriotism, per cui non glorificavano certamente la guerra, per cui the poetry based on propaganda, come avevano fatto i loro predecessori. They spoke about the brutality and tragedy of conflict. We'll focus on Wilfred Owen, who was killed in battle because he experienced the First World War, and also because he's usually recognized as the greatest of these poets, per cui i poeti di guerra. Noi studieremo Owen e analizzeremo anche un piccolo estratto dalla Wasteland di Eliot.